When my daughter said, "Mom, you should find somewhere else to spend the rest of your life. There's no room for you here anymore," I didn't argue. I just stood there, holding my small brown suitcase, the same one I used on every trip with my husband, George. Today, it sat in the middle of the living room again, but it didn't carry memories this time, only silence, thick, heavy, and sharp as the air before snowfall. Clara, my only daughter, stood by the door in a bright designer coat. Her face was beautiful, almost perfect. But her eyes, they weren't my daughter's anymore. Behind her, Nathan, her husband, checked his watch, pretending to be busy. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice hoarse with exhaustion and fear of hearing the answer again. "You can't live alone in this house, Mom. You know that." Her tone carried a kind of pre-packaged sympathy. The stairs, the cleaning, the memories. "You need somewhere more suitable." I looked around. The family photos on the hallway wall, the sofa George picked, the porcelain cup still bearing my lipstick from this morning. Everything was still here, but none of it belonged to me anymore. Clara pulled out a folder wrapped in a plastic sleeve. "According to Dad's will, all assets, the house, investments, and accounts are in my name." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You must be joking. Your father would never do that." Her smile faded. "Dad knew you didn't understand finances. He trusted me more. You were just a wife, Mom. You didn't know how to invest." 43 years of marriage reduced to 4 words. Just a wife. I stood still. "What are you and Nathan planning to do?" "We're moving in," she said calmly. "You can stay a few days until you find another place. There's a senior housing complex on Maple Street. Clean, safe, and affordable. Affordable." I looked at the daughter I once taught to read, to write, to love, now speaking to me like a realtor closing a deal. "If you need help," Nathan added smoothly, "we can arrange everything. You'll feel freer." Free. How ironic. The word itself sounded like a lock clicking shut. They drove me out together. Clara didn't even let me touch the steering wheel. Before closing the car door, she pulled a small stack of bills from her wallet. $200, she said. "Enough for the first few days. I'll send more once everything's settled." $200. I'd spent thousands on her education, her children's clothes, Nathan's hospital bills, and now she handed me cash like I was a stranger at a gas station. The silver BMW rolled down the cobblestone driveway. I looked out the window, at George's lake house shrinking in the mirror. The white shutters, the wisteria vines, the old porch swing, all fading like a photograph left in the sun. Clara didn't look at me. She was texting. Nathan was talking about stocks on his Bluetooth headset. No one said goodbye. They dropped me off in front of the Sunset Inn. The neon sign flickered. Vacancy. Nathan popped the trunk and set my suitcases on the curb. "I'll call you later, Mom," Clara said through the glass, never stepping out. I watched them drive away. No hug, no glance back, just the hum of the engine fading into the cold air and the smell of exhaust lingering like a bad memory. The room I rented was small and smelled of mildew. The carpet was worn, the bed sagged, the lamp flickered. I sat at the edge of the bed and looked around. Nothing but the ticking clock and the wheeze of an old air conditioner. In 3 hours, I had gone from George Graves' wife to an old woman with nowhere to go. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. I took out our wedding photo. George in his navy suit, smiling at me. I could still hear his voice. "I've made sure you'll never have to fear the future." George Graves, meticulous to the last detail. A man who never missed a bill or a clause. And no, he wasn't the kind of man who would leave his wife with nothing. I closed my eyes and tried to remember that night, the one when he showed me his will. He said clearly, "The house, the accounts, 70% of the estate. For you. The rest for Clara, under one condition. That word, condition. I couldn't recall exactly what he called it, but I remembered the way he squeezed my hand and said, I trust you, Helen. I just don't know if I can still trust her. I opened my phone. The name Lawrence Kent, attorney at law, was still in my contacts. George once told me, if anything happens, call Lawrence. He knows everything. I stared at the red glow of the vacancy sign bleeding through the torn curtain. Then I dialed. Lawrence Kent speaking, came the familiar, calm voice. Lawrence, it's Helen Graves. I need to see you. Please, tomorrow morning. A pause. Helen? I've been trying to reach you. Clara said you were on vacation. I let out a brittle laugh. If this is a vacation, Lawrence, then I must have bought a one-way ticket straight to hell. After the call, I set my phone down. Wind slipped through the cracked window, carrying the scent of snow and rust. 2 suitcases sat in the corner, all that remained of 43 years of life. Inside were a few notebooks, a framed photo, and one unopened letter George had left on his desk. I hadn't dared to read it. Not tonight. Tonight, I just sat there, watching the motel light flicker across the window pane and thinking one single thought. If they were cruel enough to erase me from their story, then I would learn to write my own, line by line, word by word. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the torn curtain of the Sunset Inn, scattering across the wall like someone was replaying a film about a life that had just been erased. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stale cigarettes. The carpet was stained. The air conditioner wheezed like it was dying. I poured myself a cup of instant coffee from the lobby machine. The water came out cloudy, bitter, sharp enough to sting my throat. On the table, my 2 suitcases sat exactly where I'd left them. One held clothes, the other held 43 years of memories. A wedding photo, Christmas cards, and George's little note that said, Don't forget to lock the door, Helen. Now I was the one left outside that locked door. I sat still for a while, listening to the hum of passing trucks, then picked up my phone. The name Lawrence Kent, attorney at law, glowed on the screen. George's voice echoed in my head. If anything ever happens, call Lawrence. He knows everything. I pressed call. A deep, familiar voice answered, a little older, a little rougher. Kent here. Who's calling? It's me, Helen Graves. A pause, long startled silence. Then he spoke again, incredulous. Helen? I've been trying to reach you. Clara said you were taking a vacation to recover. I gave a dry laugh. If a $50 a night motel by the lake counts as a vacation, then yes, Lawrence, I'm vacationing in hell. 20 minutes later, I caught the only bus running past Maple Street. Snowflakes drifted through the wind, soft and soundless. A woman next to me was counting coins for coffee, her hands trembling. I looked down at my own hands. They shook the same way. The only difference was, I still had something she didn't. Suspicion. George would never have left everything to Clara. He was careful, methodical, obsessed with structure. Truth has structure, he used to say. If Clara was lying, then the truth had to be buried somewhere between notarized pages. Lawrence's office sat at the end of Main Street, a red brick building with a brass plaque reading Kent and Associates. When I walked in, the smell of oak and paper filled the air. Lawrence, silver-haired, lean, glasses low on his nose, looked up. Surprise flashed across his face, then softened into genuine concern. Helen, I'm so sorry about George. He was a good man. I thought you were resting in Aspen. I smiled thinly. I'm resting at the Sunset Inn, if you can call that resting. Clara and Nathan kicked me out of the house. He blinked. Kicked you out? Why, so I told him. Every word, from the moment Clara read out her inheritance papers to the $200 she tossed at me before disappearing. My voice didn't shake, because pain had already turned into something colder, purpose. When I finished, Lawrence stood abruptly and went to the steel cabinet behind his desk. He pulled out a thick binder, 200 pages at least, and dropped it onto the desk. Helen, that's impossible. I drafted George's will. He flipped through the pages, fingers trembling slightly but precise. Each rustle sounded like a ticking clock. Finally, he stopped and pointed to the opening clause. I, George Henry Graves, leave all assets, including the home at 48 Lakewood Drive and 70% of financial holdings, to my wife, Helen Graves. I closed my eyes, feeling something release inside me, like surfacing from a long, dark lake. What about Clara? I asked quietly. He turned to the last section. I leave my daughter, Clara Davis, $10 million, to be held in trust and released only if she treats her mother with respect and dignity. I couldn't speak. Every word was a blade slicing through Clara's lies. George had known. He knew what she might do once he was gone, and he had built a safeguard around me. Lawrence's voice softened. George updated this 6 months before his death. He told me Clara was becoming obsessed with money. He was afraid for you. I gave a faint, bitter laugh. He was right. She didn't just make me suffer. She made me homeless. Lawrence closed the file and slid it across the desk. Helen, what she did isn't just immoral. It's illegal. Fraud. Elder financial abuse. Document forgery. She could be arrested? I asked, calm, almost too calm. If we can prove she used an old will to deceive the bank, yes. Sunlight poured through the frosted window, scattering across the table. I realized George hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a roadmap to justice. Lawrence picked up his phone. I'm calling Detective Ramirez, Financial Crimes Division. You're not alone in this, Helen. The law's on your side. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had once trembled signing a marriage license at 22, now steady, strong, cold as steel. Lawrence, I said slowly, I want everything back. Not just the assets, myself. He smiled faintly. Then let's begin Operation Justice. Outside, the snow fell heavier. I stood at the office window, watching it blur the surface of the lake. People say snow erases everything, but it doesn't. Underneath the white, the truth still waits for someone brave enough to dig. As I was leaving, Lawrence called after me. Helen, I'll need your signature to freeze the accounts today. Clara will find out soon enough that she's not in control anymore. I turned back, smiling thinly. Good. Let her learn that a mother's silence doesn't mean surrender. That evening, I walked back to the inn. Streetlights cast a warm amber glow on Maple Street. Behind the windows, I could see families sipping cocoa, watching TV together. Someone next door had the radio on. A newscaster's voice drifted through the thin walls. Cases of financial fraud within families continue to rise across the state. I let out a quiet laugh. Not coincidence. Just the universe reminding me that no one escapes consequence. In my room, I placed the folder Lawrence had given me on the table. The cover read, Graves Estate, updated will, witnessed and notarized. It felt like a seal of destiny. I opened to the first page, George's signature at the bottom, shaky but unmistakable. Beneath it, in his handwriting, for Helen, with love and protection. I touched the ink, still faintly raised. In that moment, I wasn't a discarded widow anymore. I was a survivor. At 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. Clara Davis. I stared at the screen but didn't answer. I knew why she was calling. When the accounts freeze, when the credit cards decline, when the money stops flowing, people suddenly remember what they've thrown away. I let it ring until it went silent. Then I whispered, just for myself, Welcome to Operation Justice, Clara. That morning, snow fell like powdered chalk. Lakewood lay silent under a silver haze. I stepped off the bus, clutching the worn leather bag that held everything Lawrence had sent me the night before. On the cover, bold letters read, "Last Will and Testament of George H. Graves." I had read that line over and over all night. Each time I did, pieces of George came alive again. His steady eyes, his low voice, and the words he once told me. "I can't protect you forever, Helen, but I can leave something that makes them respect you." The Kenton Associates' office lights were already on when I arrived. Lawrence was waiting, coat on the chair, file spread neatly across the desk, a cup of steaming coffee, a sealed golden envelope, the original will. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 40 years, I said quietly. He carefully broke the seal, sliding out the thick stack of papers stamped with the red court seal. Every rustle sounded like a clock ticking toward truth. I kept my eyes on each word as Lawrence began reading, his voice calm and deliberate. "I, George Henry Graves, being of sound mind and full capacity, hereby declare this my last will and testament." He paused. "Helen, this is the part you need to hear." I nodded. "I leave 70% of my assets, including the primary residence at Lakewood, all investments, bank accounts, and retirement funds to my wife, Helen Graves, so she may live safely, freely, and with respect. The remaining $10 million shall be held in trust for my daughter, Clara Davis, and shall be disbursed only if and when she fulfills the following condition. She treats her mother, Helen Graves, with respect and dignity." I sat in silence. Those two words, respect and dignity, echoed through the wooden room. George knew me. He knew I never cared about wealth. All I ever wanted was to be seen as human. Lawrence continued reading. "In the event Clara fails to meet this condition, the full balance of the trust shall revert to Helen Graves or to a charitable organization of her choosing." I could hear the blood in my ears, not from anger but from justice finding its way back through George's handwriting. Lawrence looked up. "Helen, do you realize what this means? The moment Clara threw you out, she forfeited her inheritance." I nodded. "And she doesn't know it yet." "Not yet," he said, "but she will." "I've already filed a temporary court order. Her accounts will be frozen within 24 hours. Outside, the snow had stopped. Sunlight cut through the glass, flashing cold across the desk like a blade. Just then my phone buzzed. Clara Davis. Lawrence glanced at me. "Do you want to take it?" "Of course." I put it on speaker. Clara's voice trembled, the polished confidence gone. "Mom, the bank said something's wrong with my accounts. I can't withdraw money. They said there's a freeze order. What did you do?" I looked at Lawrence, a faint smile forming. "Nothing, Clara. I'm simply honoring your father's final wish." "You're destroying this family!" she shouted. "No, my dear," I said softly. "I'm restoring it, starting with the truth." I hung up. Through the silence, I thought I heard her sob. Whether from fear or shame, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Lawrence leaned forward. "Do you want to pursue criminal charges?" "Forgery, asset fraud, elder abuse. We have enough evidence." I hesitated. I saw Clara as a little girl again, wild blonde hair, running to me during thunderstorms, crying until I held her. Now that same girl was crying again, for money. "Not yet," I said. "Let her sit in her panic for a few days. Then we'll move." He nodded. Understood. That afternoon I returned to the Sunset Inn. I laid the will flat on the table beside a cup of herbal tea. The scent of mint filled the room. With a red pen, I underlined one line 3 times. Clause 3, dignity. George hadn't just written about money. He'd written about morality. I could feel him in every comma, every pause. "I know she might try to erase you, Helen, but justice will find you, as long as you hold on to your dignity." When night came, I opened a small notebook. On the first page, I wrote in neat block letters, Operation Justice, Day 1. Clara's accounts frozen. Dignity clause confirmed by Lawrence. Evidence secured. Original will, notarized copies, banking records. Next step, contact Detective Ramirez. Each line I wrote felt like a brick rebuilding the woman Clara had tried to break, the mother she'd underestimated. 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Outside, snow fell again, soft, endless, but this time, I didn't feel cold. I poured more tea, turned on the lamp, and wrote one final line in my notebook. Truth has structure, and dignity. That's the most expensive clause in life. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop, text after text from Clara. Mom, please talk to me. The bank says I could be investigated. Mom, I didn't mean to. I just needed the money. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent her a single photo. The final page of George's will. His signature beside a handwritten line that sealed everything. Dignity above all. It was the third morning since I'd been thrown out of my home. Lakewood lay under a soft gray mist that veiled the lake like mourning cloth. I sat in a small cafe on Main Street, sipping a lukewarm Americano. On the table in front of me was a brown leather notebook. Embossed on the cover, Operation Justice. Lawrence rested his hand on it. His eyes carried that particular light, the kind only people who still believe in justice ever have. Helen, he said quietly, from now on, we don't talk about feelings. We talk about evidence. He spread 3 documents across the table, a copy of the will, the court's freeze order, and a list of bank transactions Clara had made in the 2 weeks after George's funeral. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, a single number glared back at me. $1,860,000 transferred from the joint investment fund into her personal account. Lawrence spoke slowly, almost coldly. You see it? She moved that money before the will was even read, meaning she acted using forged documents. I gripped my cup tighter. She called it a daughter's love, I said. I call it premeditated theft. The cafe door opened, letting in a rush of cold air. A tall man in a leather jacket walked toward us. Lawrence stood. Helen, this is Detective Ramirez, Jefferson County Financial Crimes Division. Ramirez shook my hand. His voice was low, steady, metallic. I've reviewed the files Lawrence sent. Mrs. Graves, what you did, staying quiet, collecting paperwork, not confronting her, that was smart. But now comes the hard part. I nodded. Hard or not, I'm going through with it. He opened his notebook. Do you have any text, emails, or anything Clara sent that proves she knew what she was doing? I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a printed email Clara had sent to the bank just 2 days after George's funeral. I slid it toward him. According to the latest will, all assets are transferred to me, Clara Davis, the sole heir. Ramirez looked up. That word, sole, is key. If the original will contained the dignity clause, then she knew and still used an old draft. That's federal fraud. Outside the window, workers were shoveling snow off the sidewalks. Each scoop revealed a dark patch of ground beneath the white. The truth's the same, I murmured. The more you dig, the more it shows. Ramirez gave a brief smile. I like the way you think, Mrs. Graves. Would you like to be part of the final phase? I raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? A recorded conversation, he said. Clara will incriminate herself. That afternoon, Lawrence drove me to his home to prepare. A red brick house on a foggy hillside, windows looking out toward the pine woods. On his desk sat a tiny silver microphone, no bigger than my thumb, beside a folder stamped Operation Justice, Phase 2. You'll just talk normally, he instructed. When she calls or visits, let her speak. Ramirez will be nearby, monitoring the signal. I picked up the mic. It felt like a shard of ice in my palm. George used to say, I whispered, every secret has its own sound. Maybe today we'll hear hers. As 3 hours later, the phone rang. Clara Davis. I hit record. Mom, she said, breathless. I don't understand what's happening. The bank says there's a problem with the will. Did you file something? I kept my voice even. Just the original document, Clara. Do you remember the dignity clause? The what? The clause your father added, that you only inherit if you treat your mother with respect. Silence. Then the sound of her breathing, sharp, angry. You're lying. There's no such clause. Lawrence motioned for me to continue. Then why are you so nervous? I asked softly. If I'm wrong, the bank will return your money soon enough. A pause. Then Clara snapped. I only did what I had to do to protect this family's assets. Dad didn't understand you. Ramirez nodded, jotting a note. She just admitted intent. When the call ended, I set the phone down. No one spoke for a moment. Only the ticking of the wall clock, the heartbeat of justice returning. Lawrence turned to Ramirez. Is that enough? Enough to open a federal case, Ramirez said. But we'll need the physical copy, the forged will. That night, back in my small room at the Sunset Inn, I couldn't sleep. Outside, snow smothered the windows. I replayed the memory. Clara holding that paper, waving it like a trophy. I remembered its pale yellow tint, the faint circular watermark in the corner. George never used that kind of paper. His official documents were always printed on white stock, embossed with a star watermark. My heart began to pound. She still had the fake copy. In the safe. At the house. The next morning, I walked into Lawrence's office. We have to go in, I said. He frowned. Helen, that property's under legal dispute. You can't just... I don't need to break in, I interrupted. I need to do it legally. Ramirez spoke up. If Mrs. Graves consents, I can file for an emergency search warrant. Probable cause, document forgery. But she'll have to accompany us to identify it. I looked at both men. I lived in that house for 43 years. I know every creak in its floorboards. I'll find it. By late afternoon, we stood before the white house by the lake. The windows were shuttered. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold metal. Ramirez showed the warrant to the local officer. The door opened. I stepped inside. My pulse raced, but my hands didn't tremble. Every footstep echoed with memory. George's laughter. Clara studying at the kitchen table. The sound of boiling tea. Now, all that warmth was gone. I walked upstairs to George's study. The old painting was still on the wall. Beneath the desk, the black safe. I knelt down, lifted the small panel beneath the carpet where George had hidden the spare key. Ramirez nodded silently. The safe clicked open, releasing the musty scent of old paper. Inside, exactly as I'd imagined, a folder labeled Graves Estate Revision Draft. I flipped through it. At the bottom of the last page, a sloppy imitation of George's signature. This is it, I said. Ramirez slipped on gloves, sealed the file in an evidence bag. Good work, Mrs. Graves. Operation Justice has officially entered Phase 2. As we walked out, I turned back toward the house. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. A monument to truth painted over with layers of lies. I whispered, just to myself, George, you see this? The walls still stand, but the one inside me has finally fallen. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Lawrence. FBI Financial Division has accepted the case. They'll be in touch soon. I sat by the window, watching the lights shimmer across Lakewood. Ripples spread slowly across the surface. Steady, patient. Justice moves the same way, slowly, but always forward. Night fell over Lakewood like a heavy curtain. No wind, no sound. Only the silver moonlight rippling across the still water and the black silhouettes of the pines. I sat in my small room at the Sunset Inn. The lamp cast a warm glow over my leather notebook. Operation Justice, Phase 2. The first page, marked in red, read, "Evidence submitted to the FBI." The next page was blank. I knew by midnight it wouldn't be anymore. My phone rang at 9:42 p.m. Clara Davis. I stared at the name for a few seconds before answering. "Mom, I'm outside your house." Her voice trembled, breaking like thin ice. "I need to talk. Just 10 minutes, please." I glanced at the window. Headlights flickered through the torn curtain. The small silver mic sat in my coat pocket. Ramirez's warning echoed in my mind. If she comes, stay calm. Let her talk. Tonight, you're not just her mother. You're a witness. I grabbed my coat, slipped the mic inside, and stepped into the night. George's white house stood silent by the lake, washed in pale light. The porch light glowed faintly. Clara's shadow flickered against the wall, smaller, shakier than I remembered. I stopped at the gate, wind cutting through the trees. Her eyes were wet when she met mine. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. "Then start with the truth," I said. We sat on the old wooden bench under the porch light. Rain began to fall, soft, scattered, rhythmic against the tin roof. Clara twisted her hands together. "You know already, don't you?" "All of it." My voice was steady. "Your father left a dignity clause, and you broke it." She closed her eyes. "I didn't have a choice. After Dad died, Nathan lost his job, and the debts, they were crushing. I just wanted to keep the house, to keep our image of family." I said nothing. Rain thickened, filling the silence. "I never meant to kick you out," Clara said. "Nathan made me. He said if you stayed, I'd lose control of the assets. He threatened to leave me, Mom. I was scared." I looked directly at her. "You were scared of losing money, Clara. I lost a family." Her shoulders shook. Tears spilled down her face. I know I was wrong. But if the FBI investigates, I'll lose everything, even the kids. They'll think I forged the will. But I didn't. I only signed it. Nathan handled the rest." I slowly set my purse on the table beside us, adjusting my coat slightly. The tiny mic was recording every word. "You said Nathan did the rest," I asked softly. "Yes. He printed the old draft, replaced the signature, sent it to the bank. He said it was just a formality, that you'd never know. He said you were too weak to notice." I interrupted, voice like glass. "Weak?" Her eyes widened. "Clara," I said, calm and cold, "you just confessed. Into your mother's microphone." She froze. "Microphone?" I reached into my pocket, pulling out the silver device. Its metal glinted in the porch light. "Your father once told me the truth has its own sound, and tonight you've played it yourself." Clara sobbed. "You can't do this. I'm your daughter." I stood. "And George was my husband. He died believing you'd protect me. You did the opposite." My footsteps creaked on the wet boards. Rain pounded harder on the roof. Clara ran after me, grabbing my arm. "Mom, please!" "If they charge me, I'll lose everything, even the kids." "You don't understand. Nathan used your name. He opened an account in it. He even faked your voice when calling the bank." I turned to her. No anger left, just exhaustion. "Clara," I said quietly, "you just gave the FBI exactly what they needed." From the darkness, a flashlight beam cut through the rain. Detective Ramirez stepped out from a parked car, his coat soaked, his voice firm. "Thank you, Mrs. Graves. We've got it all." Clara stumbled back. "FBI? No, Mom, you set me up?" I didn't answer. Ramirez moved closer, his tone professional, cold. "Miss Davis, You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used as evidence in a federal investigation. Clara collapsed onto the porch steps, her sobs mixing with the sound of rain. I stood there, watching my daughter, not as a mother this time, but as someone seeing the truth for what it was. Under the flashing red and blue lights, her face looked pale, hollow. "Mom," she cried, "I'm sorry. I just wanted an easier life." I said softly, "Easy isn't the same as right, Clara. And justice, it may come late, but it's always on time." Ramirez nodded to his team, signaling the end. "Mrs. Graves," he said quietly, "you've done what few mothers ever could." I gave a faint smile. "I didn't do it out of courage, Detective. I did it out of self-respect." He dipped his head. "That's justice, too." Substrapt 2020. When they led Clara away, the rain finally stopped. Only the scent of wet pine lingered. I sat back on the porch, my hand resting on the railing where George used to hang Christmas lights. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid anymore. I opened my notebook and wrote the final line of the day. February 14th, the porch confession. Clara, admitted forgery. Nathan, possible accomplice. Recording, handed to FBI. Then, beneath that, I added one more sentence. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs one quiet rain and a microphone sensitive enough to catch the sound of regret. As I walked away from the porch, dawn began to break. The first light cut through the clouds, scattering across Lakewood like silver glass. I looked down at my reflection. Small but unshaken. The morning after Clara's arrest, Lakewood fell under a strange kind of silence. Not peace, more like the hush after an explosion. News spread fast. Daughter of the Graves family charged with will forgery and $33 million financial fraud. I stared at the headline, flashing across the old TV in my Sunset Inn room. The woman in the mirror, silver hair, hollow eyes, face pale as frost, wasn't a victim anymore. I was a witness and a target. By noon, a text appeared on my phone. "I know where you are. Don't play with fire. ND. Nathan Davis." I set the phone down. My heartbeat stayed steady, just a cold current running up my spine, the kind you feel when you open a freezer door in the dark. I knew he'd come. Men like Nathan don't handle losing control. Around 7 p.m., someone knocked. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Not afraid, calculated. I cracked the door open. Nathan stood there, black coat, loosened tie, the faint sting of cologne and cigarette smoke clinging to him. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "May I come in, Mrs. Graves?" I stepped aside silently. If justice was a chessboard, I'd already seen this move coming. He glanced around the small room and gave a low laugh. Modest, for someone who just won $33 million. I met his smirk with ice. Fitting, for someone living on real money. He sat down, elbows on his knees, voice dropping lower. "You know the FBI is going to tear everything apart, and when they find what they're not supposed to, you'll go down with it." I didn't blink. "What are you implying?" "I'm talking about George." He leaned closer. "You think he was just a businessman? You really don't know where that money came from, do you? If you're smart, you'll stay quiet and let me handle it." The air thickened. The old clock ticked. Slow, sharp, like a countdown. I poured tea, my voice calm. "You think I never knew George's past? How much do you know?" Enough to recognize when someone's trying to use me as leverage. He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "You're sharper than I thought. So let's talk plainly. George had secrets. If I hand those secrets to the FBI, every clean dollar of yours turns to evidence. They'll see you as an accomplice. But me? I'll be the cooperating witness. No charges. Freedom. I watched him for a long second. The lamp's glow split his face into two halves, light and shadow. That's where men like Nathan live, between law and sin, always calculating which side pays better. "What do you want?" I asked. He reached into his pocket, laid a folded paper on the table. $5 million. Transfer it to me before Friday, and I'll forget to turn over those files. You'll keep your house, your reputation, and your illusion that George was a good man. I said nothing. Steam curled between us, thin, bitter, dissolving. I remembered George's eyes the night he died, deep, guarded, hiding something even love couldn't reach. Then I spoke quietly, my tone steady. "You talk too much, Nathan." "But you forgot one thing." He frowned. "What's that?" I leaned back slightly, a faint smile touching my lips. "You're being recorded." He froze. His gaze darted across the room, the clock, the lamp, the table. Then he laughed, rough, humorless. "You think I'm that stupid?" "No," I said evenly. "I think you're arrogant enough to believe you can't be caught." He stood, leaning so close I could smell the iron on his breath. "If you turn me in, you'll go down too. They'll dig everything up. George's deals, his offshore accounts. You'll drown with him, Helen. You have no idea what you've touched." I looked straight into his eyes, calm, unshaken. "You're not threatening me, Nathan. You're just explaining why the FBI will enjoy listening to you." The phone rang. I picked it up without breaking eye contact. "Agent Monroe," the voice said. "Everything all right, Mrs. Graves?" "Perfect," I replied. "The guest is being very forthcoming." Nathan's face went pale. "You set me up?" "No, Nathan," I said softly. "You set yourself up." The door burst open. 2 federal agents entered, coats damp, badges glinting. "Mr. Nathan Davis," one of them said, "you're under arrest for extortion, obstruction of a federal investigation, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The metallic click of handcuffs filled the room. The final note of a song I never wanted to hear again. Nathan didn't fight. He just turned his head toward me, mouth twisting into a crooked smile. "You think you've won. George wasn't an angel. When they find the real truth, you'll lose everything." I met his gaze. "Maybe, but at least I'll lose it with dignity." When they left, the room fell silent again. The smell of cold tea lingered. Rain tapped softly against the window, blending with the distant siren. I sat down, opened my leather notebook, and wrote. February 16th. Nathan arrested at Sunset Inn. Charges: extortion, conspiracy, obstruction. FBI case file updated. Then, beneath it, one more line. Justice doesn't knock twice. When it comes, open the door, even if there's a storm outside. I stood and drew the curtains open. Streetlights shimmered over Lakewood, silver and gray. Across the water, the White House still stood, once a symbol of love, now a monument of deceit. I knew this wasn't over. Ramirez had warned me. When a drowning man goes under, he'll grab whoever's standing closest. Nathan was only the beginning. Clara would fight to save herself, and soon, the FBI would start digging into George. I brewed another cup of lavender tea and breathed in deeply. Outside, snow drifted lazily, each flake hesitating before it touched the ground. I thought of George, the man who once promised I'd be safe forever. And I whispered into the stillness, if that was a lie, I'll be the one to uncover it, layer by layer. Monday morning. The mist over Lakewood was so thick it swallowed the horizon whole. I stood in front of the White House, George's house, as people still called it, though now I wasn't sure what to call it anymore. Justice was coming, but I'd learned something by then. Every truth has a price, and it's never cheap. The front door still bore the yellow FBI seal, stretched tight across the porch like a warning. Detective Ramirez was waiting for me, a folder under his arm. "Mrs. Graves," he said, "they've granted access. We believe there's still something inside George's study, something he didn't tell anyone." I nodded and slipped on a pair of gloves. When the door creaked open, the familiar scent of old wood and tobacco drifted out. Everything was where it had always been, except now the house wasn't a memory. It was evidence. We entered George's study. That room had once been his world. Dim light, shelves packed with files, his Olympia typewriter sitting neatly on the walnut desk. On the wall hung a map of the world, its surface punctured with red pins. Ramirez scanned the room, speaking almost to himself. George left too many clues. Maybe he knew this day would come. I ran my hand along the desk. A fine layer of dust coated it. In the corner sat his old Parker pen, the nib pointing toward the file cabinet. I froze. It wasn't random. George always left signals. There were 3 drawers. The first held bank statements, clean, predictable. The second smelled of mildew and ink, old receipts, tax records, nothing useful. But the third drawer stuck. Ramirez tugged at it, locked. I knelt down, feeling under the baseboard, the same spot where George used to hide his spare car key. A loose panel. Behind it, a tiny brass key labeled S1. The lock clicked open with a dry snap. Inside was a thick bundle wrapped in brown fabric and tied with leather string. I set it on the desk. My heart didn't race, it just weighed. Across the cover in George's familiar handwriting, private files, consulting projects, confidential. I untied it. Dozens of transaction sheets, wire transfers, lists of company names I'd never heard before. Ramirez flipped through a few pages, his brow tightening. These names don't exist. They're shell companies. Shell? I asked quietly. Fronts. Fake firms used to launder money or hide sources. I stared at the numbers. Hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions. Each transfer signed George H. Graves. No, I whispered. He wouldn't. Ramirez's tone was steady, almost gentle. He was brilliant, Mrs. Graves. Brilliant men know how to make crime look clean. But look here. Dates, routing codes, Cayman Islands, Zurich. This ran for at least 10 years. I sank into the chair. Those numbers looked like dried blood. One page caught my eye. A letterhead stamped Torino Consulting, LLC. Ramirez froze when he saw it. Torino, he muttered. Jesus, they're the financial wing of a Denver crime syndicate. We've heard rumors someone in Lakewood laundered money for them, but we never had proof. The air turned cold. So George, he was that man. Ramirez hesitated. We don't know yet, but if it's true, the Bureau will want everything. I walked to the window. Outside, the lake shimmered in fractured sunlight. Too bright, too clean. If George was involved, as said, then everything I own is dirty. Ramirez stepped closer. Maybe. Or maybe he was undercover. There were whispers of a confidential informant embedded with Torino. If it was George, the Bureau has another file. Sealed. I turned to him slowly. You're saying my husband might have been working for the FBI? He nodded. There was an insider, code name GHG. The informant who brought down half of Torino's network in 2019. If that's your husband, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. I looked at the stack of files. Betrayal and hope braided together. If George had been undercover, he wasn't a criminal. He was playing the most dangerous game of all, pretending to be one. My throat tightened. If that's true, it could save Clara's life. Ramirez's eyes hardened. No, Helen. Clara still committed crimes, but this could save George's name, and yours. I kept turning pages. Buried between invoices was a small unmarked envelope. Inside, a silver USB drive labeled AG 12 years. Ramirez glanced up. Got a computer? George does, I said. We plugged it in. The screen flickered, then lit up with a single line. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. Ramirez leaned in. Go on. Then a voice. George's voice. My name is George Henry Graves. For 12 years, I've worked deep cover as an informant for the FBI Financial Crimes Division. My assignment? The Torino family. Every dollar moved through my consulting firm was traced, recorded, and reported. My hand covered my mouth. The sound of his voice filled the room, calm, certain, heartbreakingly familiar. Helen, if you're hearing this, it means I never got to tell you. Everything I left behind is legitimate. You have nothing to fear, but be careful. Torino won't stop. Ramirez whispered, Jesus, he was the source. George's recording continued. All the evidence is stored in a secondary hard drive, hidden in the wall safe behind the map. If the FBI comes, give it to them. And Helen, don't trust anyone, not even Clara. She'll come for the money. I wrote the dignity clause to protect you. The screen went dark. Silence filled the room, broken only by the wind through the cracked window pane. I turned toward Ramirez. He nodded. We need that drive. Now. I walked to the world map, fingers trembling only slightly. I pulled the red pin from Western Europe. A soft click echoed. The map swung open to reveal a hidden safe. Smaller, heavier, lined with steel. Inside, a black external hard drive stamped FBI Property, Financial Division, and a folded note in George's handwriting. Truth has structure. So does love. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't cry aloud. George was still George, still keeping his promise. He'd just been playing a game too big for time to finish. Ramirez sealed the safe and exhaled. Now we know why Nathan and Clara panicked. They found pieces of this, but not the meaning. They thought George was guilty, when he was actually helping us. I nodded slowly, the weight of the truth pressing on my chest. So I'm not just a victim, I said. I'm the keeper of evidence that could destroy an entire network. Ramirez smiled faintly. Mrs. Graves, Operation Justice just went federal. Chapter 14. I stepped out onto the porch. The clouds parted, spilling sunlight over the lake like molten glass, and in that glow, I saw George again, standing in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, his voice echoing from another life. The truth is the only thing that can't be burned. Now, I believed him, because I was holding the flame. Noon the next day. Lakewood wore a sky the color of ash. I sat in Ramirez's car with the black external drive resting in my leather bag on my lap. It was small, smaller than my palm, yet it carried everything. The truth about George, about Torino, and about the life I'd lived for 43 years without knowing. As we pulled into the federal complex in Denver, Ramirez said quietly, Helen, the Bureau's gonna want everything. They may press hard. They may doubt you. Don't get defensive. They need to see a witness, not a cover-up. I pressed my lips together. I have nothing to hide, Detective. Only what George never got to say. The FBI Financial Crimes Division was bright and cold enough to feel inhuman. Fluorescent lights buzzed over stone floors. My heels clicked like a metal heartbeat. We passed through 2 security doors into a windowless briefing room. An American flag on the wall. 3 words in brushed steel. Integrity, accountability, justice. A woman was waiting, navy suit, hair pulled back, eyes like scalpels. Ramirez said, Helen, this is Agent Sarah Monroe, Financial Crimes. Monroe's handshake was cool and sure. Mrs. Graves, thank you for coming. I've heard a lot about Operation Justice. Now show me what's been keeping my team up at night. Ramirez set the drive on the table and slid it toward her. Evidence left by her husband. Audio, ledgers, hidden books for the Torino network. Monroe looked to me. Did you know who your husband really was? I drew a breath. I do now. And I want everyone else to know too. She plugged in the drive, typed in a code, Folders bloomed across the screen. 2011, 2012, 2013. She opened 2015. Spreadsheets, internal reports, wire maps stamped FBI, controlled operation. Ramirez exhaled. God, George really was deep cover. Monroe leaned back, studying me. We've had anonymous source GHG in Torino files for years. We never imagined it was a Lakewood civilian. He helped us break 4 of their shadow finance arms. Did you know he was nearly killed in 2016? I flinched. No, George never told me. Of course not. His status was compartmentalized. We thought he'd been pulled out, but it looks like he kept collecting until he died. She opened the folder labeled Final Transmission, an audio file, time-stamped 2 weeks before George's death. His voice lower, rougher than I remembered. FBI, this is my final report. I've mirrored the full transaction chain to drive GHG3. If I don't make it, transfer everything to my wife, Helen Graves. She'll know what to do. Monroe paused the clip. The room held its breath. Then she said, steady and clear, Mrs. Graves, your husband saved us. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a buried link in our largest case against Torino's laundering network. Memories flooded back. Late nights, phone calls taken outside, sudden trips. I had once thought he was betraying me. He was betraying crime. Monroe's gaze softened a notch. Helen, I need to ask this. Have you received any funds from Torino-linked accounts? I used only the retirement and joint investment accounts. George handled the rest. Good. We'll freeze an audit temporarily, but I expect they're clean. He was authorized a small percentage to maintain cover. It's in the federal paperwork. Ramirez asked, what about Clara and Nathan? Monroe flipped a page in her notebook. Fraud, forgery, extortion of a federal witness. They're looking at serious time. Thanks to this drive, the Torino case expands to 3 states. Your relatives are now footnotes in a much bigger story. I said quietly, I'm not after revenge. I want the truth put in its proper place. And that's exactly what you're doing, Monroe said. She opened another file. Torino Internal, Agents, 2019. The last line read, Informant GHG, status deceased, asset verified. Monroe looked up. We'll recommend a Department of Justice civilian commendation for George, but I have to ask, will you testify if the Torino case goes to trial? I let the silence sit, then nodded. George risked his life to speak the truth. I can do the part that's left. When the meeting ended, Monroe sealed the drive in an evidence box. Helen, you'll be under temporary protection now. You can return home, but federal personnel will be nearby. Some Torino actors are still at large. I asked, will they come for me? No hesitation, she said. If they believe you know too much, they'll try. But we plan to stay 1 step ahead. On the steps outside, people hurried past in winter coats. Ramirez lit a cigarette, took a long drag. You did the right thing, Helen. But you know how this goes. Every justice story has consequences. I met his eyes. I'm not afraid of consequences. I'm afraid of silence. Snow began on the drive back, big, slow flakes tumbling in the headlights like pieces of memory letting go. I leaned my head against the window and watched my reflection blur. The woman looking back wasn't anyone's erased wife or discarded mother. She was a witness. That night, back at the house, I opened George's study again. The desk was bare, only a framed photo from our Oregon days when everything felt simple. I set his note, truth has structure, so does love, into a small glass frame at the center of the desk. Then I opened Operation Justice and wrote, February 19th, FBI meeting. George confirmed, deep cover asset, 12 years. Clara and Nathan, federally charged. Torino investigation, expanding. And, at the bottom, truth doesn't spare you pain. It just gives you a reason to go on. When I turned off the lamp, moonlight pooled through the window and washed over George's photo. I whispered, "I've done my part, George. The rest, I leave to justice." Somewhere down the road, FBI sirens faded into the dark. Lakewood went quiet again. But inside me, a new chapter had just begun. 3 days after the FBI meeting, Lakewood had shed its snow, leaving only the damp scent of thawed earth. I sat by the window, watching pale light skim across the lake and spill over my cold teacup. It felt like the story was over. Clara indicted, Nathan in custody, George cleared. But Monroe had warned me. When a network collapses, never mistake quiet for safety. That morning, Monroe called. "Helen, we need your help for one last thing." Her voice was low, clipped. I could hear wind hissing through the line. "A meeting," she said. "A fake negotiation. We need them to believe you're ready to trade the drive for Clara's release. A sting operation. One last move to catch the remaining head of the Torino syndicate." "I'll do it," I said. "Are you sure?" George lived 12 years in the dark to bring them down. I just need one afternoon. The meeting would take place in the old Fairmount greenhouse, where George once grew orchids, a place long abandoned. No cameras, no neighbors. Perfect for crime. And for justice. Ramirez drove me there. Before I stepped out, he handed me a tiny microphone, no bigger than a button. "It'll transmit straight to the tactical unit," he said. "Don't touch it. Don't panic. If they sense fear, let them talk." I nodded. I've learned to stay quiet longer than they expect. Wind swept through the dead fields as we drove. I caught my reflection in the car window. Silver hair, steady eyes, no trace of fear. If George had played this chess game for 12 years, this was the final move. And I would be the queen. Dusk had fallen when we arrived. The greenhouse stood silent, glass fogged over. Inside, 2 men waited, one stranger and one ghost from my past. Lawrence Kent. Ramirez had been right. When money disappears, bad lawyers turn criminal. "Helen," Lawrence said smoothly, his voice like oiled marble. "It's been a while." "Not long enough," I replied. "Just enough time to see who's really been pulling the strings." The stranger, mid-50s, leather jacket, gloved hands, stared at me with thinly veiled contempt. "The drive," he said. I placed my bag on the table under the amber light. "It's here, but I want Clara released." Lawrence chuckled softly, as if amused by a child's story. "Helen, you still don't understand. Your daughter was just a pawn. What we need is the data George collected. You give it to me, and everything disappears. No press, no FBI, no charges." I looked him straight in the eye, seeing my reflection in the glass, cold but clear. "You assume I still believe promises from the man who forged my husband's will." The man in leather stepped forward, pulling a gun from his coat.
"You're pushing it, lady."
I didn't move. "You'd really shoot a federal witness while the FBI is listening." His hand hesitated, a flicker of doubt. Lawrence hissed, "Turn off the lights." Darkness swallowed the room. Through the black, I heard a faint click, the mic at my collar lighting green. Monroe's voice whispered in my earpiece. "Signal received. Keep them talking. We're closing in." I drew a slow breath. George's voice echoed in my mind. "Never fear the man with the gun. Fear the one who smiles while lying." I spoke clearly, softly. "Lawrence, you weren't just George's lawyer. You were Torino's handler, weren't you?" He froze. "What nonsense is this?" "I saw the transfer contracts. Your firm, Torino Consulting. Same dates, same accounts, your signature. You can't erase that. Light flared outside the greenhouse, flashlights slicing through the fog. They didn't notice. I went on, my voice steady. You thought George worked for you, but you've been the watched one all along. Lawrence's face hardened. You know too much. No, I said quietly. I know just enough to finish this. The door burst open. FBI! Hands where we can see them! White light flooded the room, sharp, blinding, pure. Lawrence and the gunman froze, arms raised. Ramirez stormed in with 2 agents behind him. I stood motionless, watching as time slowed, silver cuffs snapping shut, the sound crisp as glass breaking. When Roe entered last, her navy suit soaked with rain. Mrs. Graves, are you all right? I nodded once. She turned to Lawrence, voice cutting through the air. Lawrence Kent, you are under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy with the Torino network, and obstruction of federal justice. He tried to smile, but it cracked. Helen, you have no idea what you've done. They'll come for you. I looked at him, calm as still water. Justice doesn't need their forgiveness. It only needs them to stop lying. As they led him out, Monroe said quietly, You just closed a 12-year case, Mrs. Graves. George will be honored posthumously, and you did what an entire system couldn't. I looked toward the mist outside. No, Agent Monroe. I just played the final note of his song. On the way home, Ramirez turned on the dome light. When we heard the recording, you cornering Lawrence, no one spoke for a full minute, he said. We've never seen anyone stay that calm. I stared out the window. Patrol lights flickered over the lake, red and blue melting together like a heartbeat underwater. I wasn't calm, I said. I was just too tired to be afraid. That night I returned home. The house no longer felt haunted. I turned on the lights. Warmth filled every corner, reaching even George's desk. From my coat, I took out 2 things, the tiny mic and a silver handcuff, Ramirez's parting gift. To remember tonight, he'd said. I placed them on the desk. One symbol of truth, one of its price. I opened my leather journal, Operation Justice. February 23rd, The Sting. Lawrence Kent, arrested at Fairmount Greenhouse. Torino operation officially closed. George Graves, honored as federal informant, posthumous citation. And beneath it, one final line. Truth doesn't need protection. It only needs someone patient enough to let it speak. I turned off the lamp and stepped onto the porch. Rain began to fall, slow, heavy drops. Across the lake, police lights shimmered like a promise. In the dark, engines faded into distance. And for the first time, I wasn't lonely. George was gone, but the music of justice he wrote had just reached its final note. Spring came to Lakewood. The snow was gone, replaced by lavender blooming along the path to the lake and the soft scent of wood from the small house by the water. That's where I live now, after the Torino case ended. No one speaks of it anymore. The newspapers called me the 68-year-old widow who helped the FBI dismantle a multi-million-dollar network. But I know this story was never about money. It was about dignity, and how a woman rebuilt herself after being erased from her own life. My new home is smaller, but brighter. White walls, wide windows. George's oak desk, the one he built by hand, now sits in the center of the room again. On it rests our photograph, beside a small metal box engraved with 3 words. The Truth File. Inside, I've placed what's left of my former life. The silver USB George left behind. His handwritten note. Truth has structure. So does love. And the tiny microphone Ramirez gave me after that night of the sting. Each piece holds a fragment of who we were, George and I, 2 lives woven by truth and consequence. The FBI completed the commendation paperwork months ago. One March morning, Monroe visited, not in her navy suit this time, but a soft wool coat, casual and kind. She handed me a walnut frame. George Henry Graves, federal informant, posthumous honor. He didn't just expose a case, she said softly. He changed the way we think about trust. I traced my fingers over his name. They trembled, but my voice didn't. George always said justice is the only thing that can't be burned. Now I believe him. I brewed 2 cups of tea, one for Monroe, one for George. His old mug still bore the faint crack down its side. Monroe asked, "Have you thought about joining us again?" "There are nonprofit initiatives helping victims of financial abuse. You could." I smiled gently. "I already have. The Elder Justice Foundation was registered this morning." She paused, then smiled for real. Of course it was. After she left, sunlight streamed through the window, lighting the word justice on George's plaque as if it were newly carved. I thought of Clara. She's serving her sentence at the State Correctional Center. Every month she sends a letter, never asking forgiveness, just describing her classes and the garden she's growing. In her last one, she wrote, "I understand now, Mom. The one who wins in court isn't always right. The one who lives with the truth is the one who's free." I read that line over and over. Clara had finally heard what George spent a lifetime trying to say. I didn't keep the money. Half went to the Elder Justice Foundation. The rest bought the old Maple Street retirement home, the same place I'd once been forced to live. Now it's a financial recovery center for victims of abuse. I hung a sign at the gate. No one gets erased from their own story. Each morning when I walk through that gate, I feel as though I'm stepping across the line between past and present. One afternoon, Ramirez stopped by, leather jacket, coffee in hand. "I heard you turned Sunset Inn into a help center," he said, grinning. "Who'd have thought a federal sting would grow into a lavender garden?" I smiled. Justice blooms in strange places. He looked around the house, then out at the lake. "Have you found peace yet?" I took a moment before answering. No, peace isn't something you find. It's something you rebuild from ashes. That night I opened the porch door. The wind from the lake carried the scent of lavender and rain. I took out my worn leather journal, Operation Justice. The pages were full now. Dates, evidence, pain, truth. On the last page I wrote, April 10th, Operation Justice closed. George Graves cleared of all charges. Lawrence Kent sentenced to 32 years. Clara Davis, 6 years in rehabilitation. Elder Justice Foundation, officially active in Lakewood. And below it, my final words as a witness, not a victim. I didn't survive by luck. I survived because truth still wanted to be told. I closed the book and placed it inside the metal box labeled The Truth File. Locked it. Set it between George's photo and his federal plaque. Everything was finally where it belonged. One morning, as I watered the flowers, Monroe called again. "Helen, the Bureau is about to release the Torino report. You might be invited to speak." I looked out over the lake, sunlight dancing across the surface. "I don't need to say anything," I replied. "Just make sure they remember George's name. As for me, I'll keep working with those who still haven't been heard. Justice means something because of people like you," Monroe said. "No," I answered with a quiet laugh. "Justice only needs someone brave enough to tell the truth, even late." Evening fell. Lakewood rested, still and golden. I lit a small candle by the window, the same ritual I'd kept since George died. The flame flickered against the word justice and the plaque of the Elder Foundation, their reflections merging like 2 halves of one story. finally whole. Then I wrote one last letter to Clara. My daughter, I'm no longer angry. I understand. Sometimes people hurt others because they're afraid of being left behind. But remember this, truth never leaves anyone behind, as long as you have the courage to face it. I signed it simply, Helen. Not Graves, just Helen. That night I dreamed of George. He was standing by the lake under silver moonlight, smiling. Not the smile of victory, but of understanding. I walked toward him and heard his voice. You kept your promise. I tried to answer, but in the dream my voice was only breath. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows. 2 sparrows chirped on the sill, and lavender filled the air. I made my tea, opened the porch door. A young neighbor walking by waved. Mrs. Graves! I saw the news. That whole story. Was it really true? I smiled. All of it. Because justice always has structure. Just like love. Now I live quietly in this house by Lakewood. Each morning I brew tea, open the window and let the light in. And I think about how truth saved me. Slowly but surely. If my story touched you, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so that stories of justice, love, and courage keep being told. Because sometimes, one honest voice is enough to change an entire world. Top of form.